Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is now the 1st of January 2026, and I am going to do what I do every year, which is a brief recap of the previous year and some insights into the possibilities that 2026 might hold for us. Now, I've done this every year, I think, since 2021. So this is, the 5th year running that I do this kind of video once a year. It's usually my longest video that I do. I don't do very long videos. So bear with me, and I will try to keep it as short as I can. And please like, subscribe, share, whether you find me on Rumble or Twitter, or formerly Twitter, X, and YouTube, and any other place you might find this video on Facebook. Please like and share, and also subscribe. That will help me to get my message out. And obviously these things take a lot of time, and I feel that with all the clickbait, with all the useless content out there, and with people stoking friction in communities and societies to get likes and all of that, since I don't do that, I don't do things for controversy. I try to cement relationships, not break them apart between peoples. I do ask you to support me in that way. So again, this is Coach the Brains, and we will be looking at 2025 before we start making some predictions. So of course 2025 has seen a lot of interesting events, and as usual, because generally I don't talk about politics, but except for on this day, on the 1st of January every year, we will go into the geopolitics of the world as of 2025. Now, in the beginning of 2025, I predicted that there was going to be a attack on Iran. So let us start there. And obviously that came to pass. That was kind of obvious. It wasn't something that was difficult to predict, as we know that Israel has been aiming at a broader war in the Middle East, like they have instigated the war on Iraq several years ago. They claiming that they were weapons of mass destruction, which they incidentally never ever found because it didn't exist. They also have been edging for a war, pushing for a war against Iran, obviously via their relationship with the United States. Now, when it comes to the United States and Israel, we don't know if it's the dog wagging the tail or the tail wagging the dog. In other words, a lot of people think that, especially the Americans, would like to scapegoat the Israelis and the Jews and say that they are captured state, they are infiltrated by Jews and Zionists, etc. And therefore it is the tail wagging the dog. Okay, I don't believe that. I don't believe America is captured at all. In fact, I believe that Israel is part of a broader strategy to keep the Middle East in a position that they don't become too powerful. So basically, it is just a divide and conquer. It is also a strategy to promote instability in this region of the world, the Middle East, because the Middle East is historically a place where power has always been concentrated just on account of its location. Okay, it is right dead center in the world. It is also the place through which goods and services pass through historically and also in modern times. And whoever sort of controls the Middle East has the potential of great wealth and also therefore great power. And this power, they don't want it to be concentrated anywhere else but in the northern hemisphere, and hence it serves the greater interest of the West to keep the Middle East in a destabilized condition, and that is the purpose of putting Eastern Europeans in the middle of a Arab Middle East, essentially. And that's what it's about. It has nothing to do. So no, America is not a captured state, in my opinion, and it is not Zionists or Jews who are controlling the world. I think it is convenient for people to promote that view so that when they decide later on to turn on the Jews, as they always have, because they've always persecuted Jews specifically in the West, then they would be a convenient scapegoat, and that's what I think might eventually happen. Now also let me say, this is just purely based on analysis. I have nothing against anyone in particular. I just watch what's happening, I observe, and I make observations. That's it. Okay, I'm not rooting for or against in these things, because I believe personally that the world belongs to God and that all this is actually in the hands of God, and the outcome will be as God decides. I'm just an observer. That's it. Okay. So that is for the geopolitical front with the latest. Obviously, in 2025, we experienced a 12-day war. I don't think anyone expected Iran to be able to hit back as hard as they did when they did hit back. I also am not sure that things are as they appear to be, as in alliances within the Middle East, or as they appear to be. So what I mean by that is we don't know what the backdoor negotiations and deals are that takes place between world powers. For example, we don't know if the United States, Iran, and Israel have some sort of deal going on between them that we as the public are not privy to, and so we don't know to what extent things are actual or things are staged. Okay, I mean, clearly Iran's pummeling of Israel with their hypersonic missiles and whatnot was not targeted at destroying Israel. And similarly, the attacks from Israel on Iran didn't destroy Iran, and neither did the attacks from America on so-called nuclear facilities destroy the nuclear facilities. So there was no decisive victory for anybody in that exchange. No objectives were met that is stated, meaning there's no apparent objectives that were met, but there were objectives that were covertly met that we can speculate on, but that we won't know for sure. And I will tell you what they are. Okay? Both Iran and Israel were experiencing internal political tensions. Israel has a split within its population and within its government between various factions, the more secular, the more religious, those who want to live in peace and those who want to annihilate the Palestinians. So they have kind of a split. I think the majority of Israelis would like to exterminate all the Palestinians, but then there is also the pushback, and many people are not happy within Israel with Netanyahu and his government, and he faces the possibility of going to jail if tried in court for war crimes within Israel. Okay, so that exists because Israel is still supposedly a secular democracy, and they do have these checks and balances built in their government, within their government structures, where you can take the prime minister or the president or the highest office in the land to court and can be tried. So that makes it atypical when it comes to the Middle East. You can't do that in other Middle Eastern countries. So in order to stay out of jail, basically it suits Netanyahu to be in a position where he is leading the country in a war, because most legal systems do not allow for legal proceedings to take place against a president in a time of war, because the rules change when it comes to national emergencies, such as defending your country, which is the way Israel frames their genocide on Palestinians. That's on that side, on the one side. So it profits Israel to continue a war because it galvanizes the Israeli people behind the current government that they would otherwise not want, or half of their population or close to half would not be in favor of the current government. I don't know what the stats are, okay, more or less is from the last I read. Similar scenario was taking place in Iran, where there was disillusionment from certain sectors of the more secular minded Iranians that are not happy with an Islamic government, an Islamic republic, and would have opted not to have an Islamic state, essentially, but and was against the Islamic regime or government that runs their country. But the attack on Iran sort of galvanized the Iranian people to rally behind the existing leadership, because it doesn't make sense to pursue an agenda that will fracture the country in a time of war. So both countries have profited internally, basically, from this war and this exchange. Okay, I already mentioned last year, this time, that the Iranian response on Israel, the first response, obviously, that took place in 2024, was largely on account of what they saw as a violation of their sovereignty when the Palestinian militant leader of Hamas was killed in Tehran, Ismail Haniyeh, and also when senior officials were targeted in the Iranian embassy in Syria, and so on. And that was Iran's grievance, and not particularly because Iran or anyone else cares much about the Palestinian people. I know that's how they frame it, okay? And this is what you need to understand. Humanitarian framing in politics, and when it comes to governments and when it comes to war, when they say that their motivation for whatever it is they're doing is humanitarian, meaning that they're concerned for the loss of human life, you need to take that with a jug of salt, not just a pinch of salt, because I may sound bitter, or I may sound a bit, I don't know the word to use. I may sound quite negative when I say that 99.9% of political considerations do not involve the concern for human life, especially not in war situations. Collateral damage has never occurred to anybody as being a problem anywhere in modern warfare. Okay, they just don't care, to be honest. People dying is not a concern of politicians. They don't care about that. Nobody cares that people are dying. They don't also care how many people die. What they care about is whether their geopolitical game is working out in relation to two things matter to them. One is power and the other one is wealth. And that's it. Okay? Not human life. So just like dismiss that. Any country that says, okay, we are the only people, like Iran saying that, okay, we are really the only nation that has supported the Palestinian cause, etc. No, they haven't. Okay, they are not interested. Maybe ordinary people on the streets are interested and care that women and children are being massacred, but governments on average the world over, with some exceptions, generally are not concerned about things like that. They're just not. Okay? When they are, it's expedient. It's either because by showing concern for example, for the Palestinians, they are able to take a stab at their political rivals, then they will do it. In this case, when it comes to the Iranians and their Middle Eastern situation, then it is obvious who they are taking a stab at, namely their Arab counterparts who have done very little, supposedly, for the Palestinians. So they would want to frame it in that way, you know, that look how good we are and how brave we are and look how bad they are, basically. So that's more important than helping the Palestinians, actually. Okay, so you need to realize that. Okay, and then obviously what happened was also the overthrow of, before that, obviously prior to that, the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad and his government in Syria, which was seen as a military victory for the rebranded, once labeled terrorist organizations that came together to do that. But in all honesty, it was not a military victory or defeat. It was a evacuation. I mean, the truth is that the government of Syria abandoned Syria and evacuated and were ordered to stand down. It was not a military victory. It was actually a geopolitical calculation where they saw that resisting was going to be less prudent than just evacuating. So they evacuated. And why was it less prudent? Because they knew that the rebranded group of otherwise terrorists, who were once branded terrorists, now rebranded as the government, the new government, had the backing of powers much bigger than themselves, and they knew that. Okay, they knew they have the backing of the United States and of the Israelis, and that there was no chance, even if they could resist them at that point, the attack at that point, which they could have militarily, that it was going to be a war of attrition, a long drawn out battle that would end up in their defeat at any rate. So they obviously abandoned that, considering that to their north, the Shiite militias, the Hezbollah, and other organizations operating in that region were now already defeated. So they could not rely on that. And so it made sense for them, since the alliance was being alliances were shifted. It was clear that alliances were shifted, and they were probably not going to get more support from Iran, neither Syria nor Lebanon nor Hezbollah. Okay, and for me it is obvious, I know, and this is also speculative, that Iran has obviously changed allegiances. So Iran has essentially abandoned Hezbollah and their Middle Eastern project, and abandoned Bashar al-Assad and the Syrian government, essentially. And Bashar al-Assad obviously realized that, so it was no point in resisting, because they were relying on Iran. And Hezbollah unfortunately realized that too late. Okay, Iran was not going to step in to help them. They did not step in to help them. Okay, and hence that's why it was an ideal time for Israel to attack Iran, because before that Israel was more hesitant to attack Iran, considering they knew they had Iranian allies on their borders in the form of Bashar al-Assad and also Hezbollah, who are now sort of eradicated or weakened to the point of being unable to operate for the time being anyway. And so it was an ideal time to go after the head of the snake, so to say, from the Israeli perspective. Okay, from the Israeli perspective, they were kind of informally being surrounded by Iran through their alliances and proxies. Okay, so now that they managed to crush the alliances and proxies, it made sense to go directly for them, which was the piloted program that, I mean, they tried to do that as they were testing the waters. Okay, so from the Middle Eastern perspective, that obviously, I mean, if you think that the war is over, I mean, on Iran, then you would be mistaken. It really is just starting. That was just a test run, and these guys are now sort of fortifying their armies and their capabilities to go at it again. And I do believe this year, 2026, they will be going at it again. Okay, so that's my analysis of the Iranian-Israel situation. As for the massacre and genocide in Palestine, that will continue for the whole of 2026, likely into 2027 and 2028. They essentially are going to continue until they kill all the Palestinians, or all the Palestinians relocate. Possibly they will have them now with this new recognition of Somaliland. They'll probably have relocated some Palestinians there. They are also sort of trying to illegally have Palestinians get refugee status in South Africa, like as a punishment to punish us for taking them to court, which is what we did. Very proud of South Africa for that. And so we are likely to, unfortunately, we are going to see the continuation of the daily genocide that is going on against the Palestinians, and we will continue to witness further escalation in the ongoing war. And we are living in, and the other thing is, we are already living in the middle of the war, of a war, and it is a world war already. Okay, it's not that World War III will begin in 2026, is that we are in the middle of World War III already. Okay, it's just that so far, fortunately, nations have been careful to exercise a bit of restraint, or a lot of restraint actually, in their war. But this war is a collective war. Make no mistake. It's a war that's been fought on multiple fronts, which makes it a world war, and it's being fought through economic, military, and other means, coercion, bribery, corruption, and so on. Okay, so but I mean, it's being fought on multiple fronts at various levels, and we are in the middle of it as it is. Now, let's move away from the Middle East and go to the Russia and Ukraine situation. Let's call it that. Of course, Russia has cleaned up pretty good in Ukraine. Ukraine has all but obviously lost that war, or in Russian terminology, special military operation. Russia obviously has acted with a lot of restraint. They did not desire to flatten the whole of Ukraine. They fought a war that risked their troops while they didn't need to do that, and they did that because you need to understand that the Russians and Ukrainians are historically, I mean, if you go back far enough, they're essentially the same people, and it wouldn't be prudent in the long run for the Russians to cause excessive damage to a people that are essentially their people, and also that were formerly part of the Soviet Union. So, I mean, it's a good long-term strategy to tread carefully in these matters, because what you want to forge is a unity eventually between the Slavic peoples. And I think Russia has that sort of outlook and that approach to war. I mean, they have done it in the past with sort of unifying and forging peaceful relations with Chechnya, how do you pronounce it, right? When there was sort of a separatist movement that tried to break away, etc. So these things are ongoing, and again, those are also usually in part instigated by outside our other nations who have vested interests in keeping Russia weak. And this is kind of how the geopolitical game has gone for a good couple of decades, because the rule book that the dominant superpower, or up to now has been the only superpower for a while, has sort of played by, is to make sure that other nations do not rise up to rival them in power by maintaining a policy of keeping them fighting either with neighboring nations, so arming neighboring nations to keep them busy in wars so that they don't develop too fast and too much, and also to keep them in check by installing military bases near to them. So we see that NATO via the United States via NATO under Biden tried to do this with Ukraine. If you arm Ukraine to the teeth, they provide a counterweight to Russia's ambitions, military ambitions and technological ambitions, so you keep Russia destabilized in that way. And obviously they also basically in the process they threw Europe under the bus and the EU under the bus by creating tensions, forcing European nations to side with America when they were better off actually dealing with Russia, okay, in terms of buying Russian oil and gas. They have now basically kind of almost bankrupted the European Union nations through the sanctions on Russia, because it was much cheaper obviously to get their oil and gas needs met by Russia. So they thought that in the process they would bankrupt Russia, but they have done no such thing. Russia is economically still very strong because they obviously knew they can never trust the United States, and they have taken measures to fortify their economy. What has this done to this post Russia-Ukraine world? It has created a lot of mistrust in the United States, because obviously the seizing of Russian assets made other nations realize that they cannot trust the United States, and that the normal order of business where financial transactions, banking, and also stored assets like gold are ordinarily not to be touched even in war, that has now changed. Okay, they have shown that they can actually confiscate entire nations' wealth, sovereign wealth, that they have supposedly in safe holding if they want to, and that is a breach of trust that is a step too far for many nations. And so they've sort of ushered themselves, the United States have ushered in a new era of mistrust, and therefore other nations are sort of rallying together. The smaller kids on the block are rallying together to stand up collectively against the big kid, the bully, right? And that is in the format of BRICS. So the BRICS nations, of course, and allies are forging ahead to build a counterweight, an economic counterweight, and I'm emphasizing an economic counterweight and not a military counterweight, where they can trade directly with each other and circumvent the dollar. Now, this is obviously bad from an American perspective, because America makes its money on a lot of money on being the regulator of transactions and shaving something off of the top, when the dollar is the denominator for international transactions, which it no longer is. So that is a loss, and I mean, they deserve it in principle for fostering a situation where they cannot be trusted. So what we have now is a world that's being more and more sort of polarized between the unipolar and multipolar world, between the United States, Western Europe, essentially on one side, and the rest of the world on the other side. Of course, the United States and her allies. which are not very many, but are very powerful and very rich, and then the other nations rallying together to be the counterweight, the multipolar war, advocating for a multipolar world. What are my thoughts on that? I don't think a multipolar world is a natural order. I think you always have a superpower in the world throughout history. This is how it happened and this is how it works. And you do have rival powers competing, but usually one is the stronger power, and the stronger power is the anchor and creates greater stability for the rest of the world. The United States done that in the past for a long time. It has created greater security around the world, despite their needing to fight constant wars. It has sort of created safer international trade, and there has been by and large a rules-based order, policed and manned by the United States, and for which they benefited. So the basic deal kind of internationally was that, look, we will be the policeman of the world, the United States, but you will use our currency as the international denominator for trade. But now that deal has now sort of, and is unraveling, is breaking down. And I don't think that it can be repaired. And part of the reason it can't be repaired is because the United States has overspent, and their overspending has caused massive inflation around the world, because the rest of the world basically carries their debt. Okay, although they may frame it, Americans may frame it in the exact opposite way and say that other nations are using them and their money, which they kind of portray as a bad thing, but actually the fact that other nations were engaged in using American dollars was actually America borrowing against those people's economies, because at the end of the day, the value is in the goods and services and not in the money. And people who don't understand how money works will not understand that, which is of course most Americans, because they're not too bright on average, right? So that is the geopolitical situation we're in. Where are we going to? Then there's the Taiwan-China situation. China has been exerting their military presence over the skies of Taiwan. Taiwan, historically a region of China. China, again, nervous, and has been nervous about Taiwan being used by the United States as against China, and they don't want someone, a hostile country or a hostile region on their shores near to them when they are in a soft war with America. So they don't want Taiwan, who has allied with America to try to keep its independence from China, is a threat to Chinese national security. That's how China would view it, just like Russia viewed Ukraine as a threat to its national security when Ukraine has allied with NATO and the United States, and just how America would view Mexico as a national threat or a national security threat if Mexico allied with China or Russia, or Canada allied with China, and China was suddenly installing military bases in Canada and arming Canada to defend themselves allegedly against the United States, although the United States is really no threat to Canada because they don't have hostile relations. So that's kind of what's playing out. So on the one hand, you have the United States and its Western allies who want to sort of encircle their enemies through alliances with countries in and around their enemies and arm them to the teeth and then use them in a proxy war, which is what the Ukrainian thing is, okay, which is what the Taiwan is trying to be used as, right, against their enemies, because if you can't outcompete them, then you need to destroy them. Basically, that's the philosophy of the hegemony, and that is kind of what is leading us, what has put us in this situation where we are fighting a soft world war at the moment, and where it can easily escalate. That's the danger. Okay, the danger is that tit for tat reaches a point of escalation. Escalation reaches greater escalation, and then it reaches a point where you cannot walk it back anymore, and that's the danger. And I think that the sober amongst the world leaders have been cautioning everyone to cool off, to take a step back, to save the big bombs for another day, and hopefully to never use them. The point of big bombs is usually for deterrence. The idea is never to use them, but for people to know that you have them and that you will and can use them should you be forced to. That's the point of them. But when you are being edged in that direction, as Russia has been for a while now, self-restraint starts to look like the wrong thing to do. And Russia has exercised a great deal of self-restraint. So let's hope that NATO and Ukraine agree to resolve this conflict with Russia so that doesn't escalate. And let's also hope that the Israelis fix their borders, like define what their actual country is, and then leave other countries alone. I mean, that would be ideal. It's not going to happen, but that would be the ideal situation in a broken world. Okay, well, I mean, the world is what it is, and we can only do what is within reason and what is possible. Okay, it's not possible for the Middle East to be rid of Israel altogether, although that would have been ideal, considering that Arabia ought to be for Arabs and not Eastern Europeans. But the Eastern Europeans are here to stay with skin cancer and all that in the Arab world, and they are on average militarily more capable than any of the Arab rivals, and essentially they are more advanced. They have invested a lot in research and development. They have think tanks, and they have out-strategized basically the entire region, with the exception of Iran, which is why Iran is considered a military threat. Why they don't feel militarily threatened by their Arab neighbors is because, well, they've just kind of outplayed them. So they are, of course, destined to remain within the region, and diplomatically and in the interest of peace, the best thing that the people of the Middle Eastern region can do is to learn to accept that after all these years since 1948, so what is that, 1948 is 52 plus 20, 72 plus 5 is 77 years. So 77, 70, 78 years they have been around. So I think once people have been around for that long, you kind of need to accept that it doesn't matter how they got here. It doesn't matter what the misdeeds were that had them forge a country for themselves. It's soon reaching a point where the people who have done that are dead or very old, and the people who are there now are those who grew up there, and whoever was born and raised and grown up in a place belongs there just the same as anyone else, regardless of what their ancestors did. And I think that if we look at it that way and we stop looking at things generationally, like as is typical of Arabs to do, to look at 1,000 years and 2,000 years, and the Israelis look at 4,000 years, etc. If we stop doing this whole thousands of years things, and we just look at here and now and say, look, these are the people here and now that have to live together in peace, I think then peace would be possible, right? We should stop trying to make historical claims when everyone is really from everywhere, if you really look at it, okay? So I think that might be a way forward. Will it happen? Probably not, but that is likely the way forward. Of course, the genocide against the Palestinians, we must rightly condemn in the strongest terms. As ordinary people, of course, possessing no power except our voices to object, there is not much we can do, and nobody would actually listen to us anyway, apart from giving charity and helping rebuild in places where rebuilding is possible, and discouraging violence and militarism in regions and in wars that one cannot win. And this is the other ironic thing about the Middle Eastern situation, is that forces like Hamas have obviously played right into the favor of the Israelis, whose objective has always been to exterminate the Palestinians. And they have consistently for years and years, not since now, not since October the 7th, not since recently, but 20 years ago and further back, as long as I can remember, these militant organizations would fire 1 or 2 rockets into Israel that wouldn't hit a target really, and then be pummeled, and then 50 or 100 Palestinians would be killed the very same day or next day. And one cannot realistically see the point of it, okay? If you are a people with a militia, right, you cannot militarily act against a nation with an army. It doesn't make sense, okay? It doesn't make sense. It's stupid. You are inviting trouble, and you will not be able to defend yourselves when that trouble arrives. Not your woman, not your children. And why would you then do it? And this is the part that when I was younger didn't make sense to me, but now it makes perfect sense. And I am convinced that under the table, these people have self-interest, and their self-interest involves deals with the opposite side. So I don't believe that Hamas has the interest of Palestinian women and children and or the Palestinian state or a nation state in as their uppermost concern. I think that Hamas has, or on the side of the Israelis, basically, and have helped them to exterminate Palestinians by acting irrationally and by carrying out silly operations that only would further endanger their own people, because it gives the Israelis a pretext of sorts and a justification of sorts to do what they've done, what they continue to do. And this is the biggest problem that plagues these countries in the region, in and around Israel, is self-interest. Okay, nobody really cares about the people. That is the truth. Okay, and that's where we are. So in 2026, the things we can look forward to is there is a greater awareness publicly because of social media, because the outrage by individuals has reached the point of consensus almost, where Americans are on average not as in favor of supporting Israel as they have been for most of the existence of Israel. So that's changing. The momentum of that is changing, and that's fantastic from the perspective of the opposition. Of course, that would be fantastic. And also, so that's positive. That's something we can look forward to in 2026 from a geopolitical perspective. And then also the furtherance of cooperation between historical rivals. For example, the rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran has somewhat been smoothed over. That's very positive. And previously, obviously, the patching up of the rivalry between Qatar and Saudi Arabia, that was positive. Now there is obviously a bit of a tiff between the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Hopefully they'll patch that over. I think they will. I think there is more that unites them than divides them, which is an important thing. And so those are positive things we can look forward to in 2026. I think there will be greater unity moving forward. I think not so much, obviously, again, it will not be for humanitarian reasons as much as it would be for developmental reasons, okay? Economic development of Gulf countries and the diversification of Gulf economies, which I think is important. It will also free up the Gulf countries from over-reliance, obviously, on oil and gas, which would then enable them to be more independent and less reliant on imports, producing their own goods, etc. And that would definitely benefit the stability that is being fought for by so many nations within the Middle East, seeking stability. And I think that's very positive for all of those countries. As for our country, South Africa, we have seen some very, very great positive changes in South Africa, where our rand has steadily gotten stronger against the US dollar, which is positive because it means our economy is being anchored more heavily with the trade we engage in and amongst our countries in the global south. So that is a great thing. We have also now finally our president, congratulations to Cyril Ramaphosa for growing a pair and standing up against the insinuations of Donald Trump, who, as far as presidents go, is practically a madman, to be honest, and who has no statesmanship and no manners, essentially, and no class. He's a classless man. So congratulations to our president Cyril Ramaphosa for having class, and also for diplomatically standing up to a bully, even though we are a obviously much smaller nation with a much smaller economy and a much smaller and weaker army. It's not that we as a nation are declaring war on anyone, and it's also not that we have as a nation refused to trade with the United States or anyone else for that matter. We are a very open nation when it comes to diplomatic relationships with everyone, but we are also a principled nation, and we do stand by our principles, where we obviously cannot condone apartheid and genocide, and that's it. That was a principled position that we stood on. A lot of the trouble that we have sort of later experienced with the United States is as a result of having taken Israel to the International Court and having exposed on an international platform the genocide that has been going on in Israel and the terrible conditions under which Palestinians live. And that is our principled position, and that is our moral obligation as a country and as South Africans and as human beings. I am proud that we value human life more than we value our worldly success, and that we cannot say that for very many countries, even the surrounding countries around Palestine. So that is something amazing from us from our president and from our leadership. So that's good things happening in South Africa. Some sort of things that still need to happen in South Africa is obviously the cleaning up of our political system, getting rid of political corruption and state actors that have been inefficient in carrying out their duties, of which there are very many. I'm not going to go into detail, but we need to start acting like and thinking like a state and a government, and not like a little tribal system where we practice nepotism and where we invite relatives to hold positions because we have personal interests. Okay, so I mean, the job of a state is obviously to put the well-being of its people above personal interests or members of government. That's why we in South Africa call them public servants, and that is the philosophy we need to maintain moving forward. We are probably the world's greatest democracy because we still have a real and true democracy, unlike many countries. I wouldn't even say the United States has a real democracy. We also have the makings of a very, very great nation, in that as a nation we strive for equality and we strive for embracing diversity. We have many groups that have different ethnic, cultural, religious backgrounds, and yet we share the same country, and we, by and large, do not experience a lot of violence that is motivated by religious and or racial hatred, although we do experience a lot of violence and crime in general, usually motivated by poverty and or greed and or drug abuse and or gender-based violence. So we have things of that nature that needs to be addressed as a country, and it certainly can be addressed. One thing that we got a lot wrong also, and those things we need to tighten up. For example, we have historically been too soft on crime. Criminals have to fear the law, and they have to fear law enforcement, and they have to fear the punishments. So we probably need harsher punishments in our country. We should definitely bring back the death penalty, and we should definitely make our criminal justice system more efficient and our courts more efficient. Okay, it is disheartening, I'm sure, for policemen when they arrest people and then see them out on the street the next day or the next week, which often happens. It's also disheartening, I imagine, for police officers when they are not given the level of authority and also the level of respect they deserve, because people just don't fear the law as they ought to. And so to that end, I do think that law enforcement needs to be given more powers. I do understand we don't give them more powers because we also witnessed the opposite under apartheid, which was the abuse of power. And I don't know if there is a right answer to the question or a right middle road, but we need to find it, and we haven't found it because we have gone in the opposite direction. We have gone too soft. We have not empowered our law enforcement. I also think that South Africa needs to jump out of the gender equality narrative. I know that it's part of the democratic ethos to believe in the absolute equality of all human beings, both male and female, but that betrays the reality of biological and innate differences between the genders, which exists by God's design and is like that for very concrete and real biological and evolutionary reasons, which we cannot overlook. So while I do believe in equal opportunity, that men and women should have equal opportunity, I do not believe in equal outcomes, and I don't think that women should be given a leg up so that they can compete with men. So I don't think you put a short person on a chair so that he can compete with a tall person standing on the ground. Okay, there's a reason why the short person is short. Let him do something else. That's basically what I'm saying. Okay, so there's a reason why a woman is a woman, and if she cannot compete fairly against a man and get a particular position out of sheer merit, then she should not be doing it. And so I strongly object to gender-based laws that strive to bolster women into positions that they are not suitably qualified for, because they would not be able to fairly compete against men for a similar position. And I'm specifically referring to the army, I'm referring to police force, I'm referring to all these types of physical jobs that require physical strength and acumen, spatial acumen, the ability to react fast without hesitation, etc. Those jobs are on average not suitable for women, although you might get an odd woman here and there who is highly capable, in which case she should not be discriminated against, but then she needs to outcompete men, basically is what I'm saying. So if, for example, you need to run 5Ks in a certain amount of time, and you need to be able to do a certain number of push-ups, and you need to be able to act well under pressure, etc., etc., for a particular job, the standard should be the same for both men and women. Okay? You cannot say, let us lower the standard for women because they're women, because that is not equality. Okay? And that's also not in the interest of results. And as a developing nation, what we need is results, and we can only get results through running a meritocracy. I also call on South Africans to drop the BEE. I know that a lot of formerly dispossessed, formerly discriminated against people will object, because the idea behind black economic empowerment and similar policies was, of course, to help people who were previously discriminated against into the job market, into education, into etc., and they wouldn't otherwise be able to get into those positions. But now we have moved on from that. Now we are now over 20 years, more than 20 years after democracy. That failed. We should acknowledge it failed. A country must have a feedback loop to be able to analyze the outcomes of the types of decisions they undertook. If the decision has not produced the desired result, which clearly it has not, then we need to revise it. So I say, let us now drop gender equality in terms of looking for equal outcomes, because we'll never achieve that. And let us drop the race-based employment and admissions to institutions and universities and so on and so forth. And let us drop all quota systems in South Africa. Okay, so just whoever can make it, makes it, and whoever can't. It's too bad, find something else to do. Okay, if a person of any color or any gender cannot get into a particular trade or a particular university, it simply means they may have a greater aptitude to excel somewhere else, and they should be allowed to explore that other thing, instead of being told that no, it's unfair and they must have the same result as someone who is genetically more gifted, perhaps, to excel in that particular field, perhaps has a higher IQ and will just make a better doctor, etc. Okay, the slightly dumber person might do much better at building strong walls that is needed in particular places than trying to beat himself up about not becoming one of the top engineers. He simply doesn't have the acumen for it, and that's okay. And there's something for everybody. And I think we need to realize that. We need to build a meritocracy in our country. We need to have the right people in the right places doing the job. And it should not be about whether they're black or white. or whether they are male or female. It should just be that they are suitably qualified. And then finally, let me say that we also need to have people we need to set up qualifications. I hope Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa is listening. We need to set up qualifications for positions within the government. Okay, it can't be that I need to have several qualifications to work within a private corporation in a particular job to become a manager or CEO, etc. But to run a country, I don't need qualifications. I can jump out of a cricket team and then become the president, or I can, what is your experience within the political landscape, and what are your qualifications regarding the things you're going to deal with within your position. So you can't have a minister of transport who has no qualifications in transport. You can't have the president of a country who doesn't understand basic economics and who doesn't understand the rule of law and government, etc., and the branches of government and how things work within the South African landscape, and who hasn't at least read the Constitution 5 or 6 times, and who doesn't speak multiple languages, etc. But we should have qualifications for these things. And I mean, looking at some of our ministers, I'm not in government. I'm not, so I don't know the ins and outs of what the minimum criteria is. But looking at some of our ministers historically and at present, and also even some of our leaders very high in government, one does sometimes wonder what their qualifications are, and I think that we need to tighten that up a bit, and we need to start making qualifications. Also, in terms of our democracy, I think we also need to legislate a cut-off date. It cannot be that all our ministers and our president also, Cyril Ramaphosa, and are old, because I think there's a point at which as a generation you are now out of touch. It's as simple as that. I think we need to have a cut-off date. We need to say, listen, you cannot run for president once you hit 60, because like if you run for president once you have hit 60 and you stand for 2 terms, you're probably too old. I think we need to start encouraging younger people to assume positions of leadership who are in touch with the world as it is now. Because things are moving along fast, technology moves along fast, societies evolve quite fast in our time, and we cannot have a leadership that's running on yesterday's program. It just doesn't work. And so we need to fix that. And then obviously we need to get rid of the crime. It's not difficult to get rid of crime if you really want to. We can send our army into other places to get killed without weapons. I don't know how we managed to mess that up. But we can't clean up our own streets at home. Okay, so we can get rid of crime. We can beef up our policing. We can beef up our security systems, our surveillance, etc. And then we also need to start cleaning up when it comes to wine and gambling. Now, I know people will say, okay, you biased because you're a Muslim. Okay. It's because objectively in areas where you put, in residential areas, you put 4, 5, 6 shebeens and, I don't know, like 3, 4 gambling houses with slot machines, you mess up the residential area. Now, I don't know if it's deliberate. Okay. But it should not happen, is what I'm saying. So I'm not saying that in a democratic country like South Africa, where the majority of people believe it's okay to drink, that we should not have facilities where such people can drink. But I think we need to have these facilities in places outside of residential areas where people go and drink, and if they get into the odd skirmish or fight or somebody, whatever, it doesn't disrupt the residential area, and it is not a danger for children and others walking in and around those places. So I think adult entertainment and adult places should be in districts or parts outside of the towns where you can have those vices. Those are objectively considered vices. If we are a majority Christian nation, for example, then objectively drunkenness is a vice biblically. Okay, I mean, not even as a Muslim who's not allowed to drink at all, even within Christianity, okay, while drinking can be done, drinking in excess is not sanctioned by the Bible. Okay, so that we need to do in South Africa, and then we also need to limit gambling. We should either outlaw gambling, which is what I would be in favor of, or if we don't outlaw gambling, we should place stricter regulations on it, and we should not have these little gambling slot machine shops everywhere, which has now sprung up everywhere. Because wherever you find these kind of sin industries booming, it is related to, now, is it the cause of? I don't think it is the cause of a bad stagnating economy, or if it is just correlated to a bad stagnating economy and or an impoverished people. But what I do know is that gambling and drunkenness is often a problem that is more widely experienced amongst the poor, okay, who otherwise can't afford basic stuff, but they are gambling and drinking, okay. And this is something that we need to fight against as a people. We need to encourage progress, and you cannot progress in life if you're drunk half of the time, okay? And you cannot progress in life if you cannot manage your finances, and you cannot progress in life with addictions like gambling. Gambling is addictive, and this is why God, in His infinite wisdom, biblically, Quranically, in other scriptures too, has outlawed these things and or limited, as in the case with drinking, which was perhaps not necessarily forbidden altogether for Christians, was nevertheless limited. Okay, so these are some of my observations. If you take my advice, then definitely the country will improve significantly, and if you don't, then you will have to come up with other solutions. I'm not saying my solutions are the only solutions, but these are definite solutions. Some other things that needs to take place in South Africa, which I argue for, is the nationalization of public assets in the form of nationalizing mines and or any minerals and natural resources produced by the country, because it is my opinion that natural resources of a country belongs to the nation collectively, and anything that belongs to the nation collectively can only be managed and or distributed by the government. Now, I understand the impetus behind the privatization of these things by our late president Nelson Mandela, and I understand what took place there, and I'm not going to rehash it. But we need to undo that. We definitely need to undo that, and when we undo that, and if government properly manages the natural resources of the country, which will then be in their hands, the next thing you need to do is to reduce the tax burden on the country, because you will have noticed that the tax the amount of people who pay tax is steadily decreasing. So though your answer to that was to constantly increase the tax, which compounds the issue. Frankly, it's a dumb policy, to be honest with you. I don't know who comes up with this bullshit, but it's a dumb policy, okay? Because you don't actually solve the problem. Obviously, as a government, you need money to function, and your primary source of money, or a big portion of it, is obviously tax, and then also where you still own some sort of public infrastructure and or public services, okay, municipal services and telecom, etc., where you still own shares. But who uses telecom still? Do you understand? You ran the state, what is supposed to be the state-run services, you have run them into the ground, okay? Who uses telecom? Nobody. Okay, fine. Who uses the national postal services? Okay, half the time it doesn't work. Okay, so those business concerns that were supposed to generate the revenue for the government, you basically messed up. Okay, and then so in a sense it was good that a lot of our natural resources were privatized, because your incompetence might have bankrupted the whole country then in that way. But we need to rise above that. We cannot constantly fall back on the idea that our government is incompetent, because our government is actually not incompetent. And we need to reclaim our skilled people through our re-established meritocracy, where we have our best people running state-owned companies in natural resources, and also in our naturally state-owned, or what should be naturally state-owned companies, like South African Airways, for example. So it's very embarrassing for a nation that is one of the richest nations in Africa, one of the more stable democracies in Africa also, to not have a competitive airline. Okay, Ethiopian Airlines, I believe, is the biggest airline in Africa. Ethiopia. Okay, where they've had like civil war after civil war, and where they have someone who was akin to a dictator. But what happened to our airline, for example? Okay, so there's a lot of mismanagement. Obviously, I'm not going to praise our government without criticizing it. Okay, there has been a lot of mismanagement of government-run institutions, and most of this mismanagement stems from BEE and gender equality, gender equity, or what have you. All these kinds of fake laws that circumvents meritocracy. Okay, there are many well-equipped, very skilled, very hardworking, very capable black South Africans. And even they are discriminated against. They do not find their way into good jobs. They do not find their way into government because they're not somebody's sisters, uncles, brothers, fathers, something. Do you understand? Because now we have nepotism, and or people fill these BEE roles with the nearest black person that they can find, and then they give them a job that they don't actually have to do because they just want to fulfill some sort of BEE requirement. So there are lots of ways to circumvent these laws. They are circumvented, and they don't actually empower. They don't empower the people. They don't empower the country. What we need to do is also, when we do own more of our national natural resources, state-owned companies, generating revenue, we reduce the tax, we beef up the education system, we make the education system free, high quality education for everyone. Okay? In one generation, when all these people graduate, we will have a country that is well run, with qualified people, well maintained, and also where the wealth will be more evenly distributed. Okay? Because now we can compete at an equal footing. It's not anymore the case where you can say, oh, but white South Africans have more opportunity because they get the best education. Okay, why would that still be the case? Okay, it's because we have failed to make our education system competitive and free for everyone, where learners are safe, okay, within the learning environment, and where they get the highest level of education. I mean, if you do that, you level the playing field, you leave it open, you have your meritocracy, and the parts will come together, and we will have, in the next 15 years, a fantastic country. Thank you very much.